On June 18, 1960, at 10:42 p.m., 29-year-old literature instructor Isabel Romero walked out of a college fundraiser in downtown Fresno, California. By 11:15 p.m., her pale sedan left the campus lot heading south toward her small apartment near Belmont Avenue. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Isabel had missed a scheduled department meeting, a phone call to her mother, and the opening minutes of her first summer class. At 9:27 a.m., officers forced open her locked front door and stepped into a quiet apartment where nothing looked stolen, nothing looked broken, and nothing explained why its owner was gone. More than 40 years later, a single item pulled from that scene would drag her name out of a basement box and into a courtroom. Someone else knew her routine that night better than she did. Isabel's life on paper looked predictable. She taught composition and American literature at Fresno City College, kept a strict calendar, and rarely canceled plans. Her colleagues knew she stayed late to grade papers in her shared office. Her mother knew she called every Saturday at the same time. Neighbors in her two-story building knew her as the woman who carried stacks of books up the stairs and nodded politely in the hallway. In the days before she vanished, nothing obvious was wrong. Isabel completed her spring grading on schedule. She turned in summer course outlines to the department secretary. On the morning of June 18th, she taught one short class, signed a few forms for a student loan office, and told a colleague she would see them Monday. That evening, she helped set up folding chairs and donation tables for the college's scholarship fundraiser, then left the auditorium alone. When officers stepped into her apartment the next morning, they found her purse, keys, and wallet on a small table near the door. A teacup sat half full in the kitchen. A thin stack of graded essays lay on the couch with a red pen resting on top. The window was latched from the inside. The deadbolt had been turned. The only thing missing from the apartment was Isabel herself, and the timeline of that last ordinary night would soon become the first problem detectives could not solve. Isabel Romero did not move to Fresno to disappear. She moved there to build something predictable. She was born in 1931 in Bakersfield, the oldest of 3 children in a farmworker family. After high school, she earned a teaching certificate and then a literature degree at California State College in Fresno. By 1958, she had secured a full-time position at Fresno City College, teaching freshman composition and a small American fiction seminar. Her colleagues described her schedule as rigid. She arrived by 7:30 a.m., kept office hours on posted days, and left most evenings before dark. She kept those habits even in summer. By 1960, Isabel lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment a few miles from campus. Her widowed mother, Elena, rented a smaller place across town near Blackstone Avenue. Isabel paid part of that rent every month and drove her mother to medical appointments. Phone records later showed weekly calls at almost the same time every Saturday. There were no missed weekends before she vanished. Her closest connection outside family was a former boyfriend, First Lieutenant Mark Halpern. He served at a nearby Air Force installation and had dated Isabel for nearly 2 years. They ended the relationship in late 1959, but continued to speak occasionally by phone. Base logs confirmed he visited her apartment a few times after the breakup, always signing out and in at the gate. There were no reports of loud arguments or domestic calls linked to his name. In her building, one neighbor stood out. 45-year-old utility technician Victor Hale lived on the ground floor. He had received a formal warning from Fresno police 2 years earlier after sending unwanted notes to another tenant in a different complex. The incident never reached court, but it remained in his file. The third man later examined by detectives was not from her hallway or her base contacts. 24-year-old Caleb Morris had once sat in her composition class, then left college to work full-time at his family's almond ranch near the Kings River. Isabel occasionally paid him for small tasks, like carrying boxes of books to her car or fixing a loose cabinet. None of those men knew it yet, but their names would be written on the first page of the missing person file. On the morning of June 19, 1960, the first official record in Isabel Romero's case was a short entry in the Fresno Police Dispatch log. At 9:02 a.m., a caller identified as her mother reported that Isabel had missed a planned ride, missed a scheduled call, and failed to appear for a faculty meeting. At 9:18 a.m., a patrol unit was assigned to conduct a welfare check at her apartment on East Grand Avenue. By 9:27 a.m., the officers were at her door, knocking on wood that no one answered. They tried the handle and found the deadbolt locked from the inside. The small security chain was engaged. There were no prime marks on the frame, no damage to the lock. After radioing for permission, one officer forced the door with a shoulder strike. The chain snapped. The door swung inward onto a living room that looked like someone had just stepped out for a moment. A pair of low heels sat beside the couch. A light summer coat hung on a chair near the entryway. On a small table, officers noted Isabel's brown leather purse, open, with her wallet, driver's license, and folded cash still inside. Her apartment key ring lay next to it. There were no signs of broken glass, no overturned furniture, no stains on the floor or walls. In the kitchen, a single teacup sat half full in the sink. The stove was off. The trash basket held only paper and food scraps. In the bedroom, the bed was made, the closet neatly arranged, and two suitcases pushed against the wall. Nothing suggested sudden travel. On the desk, a portable typewriter held a page with the first lines of a new syllabus. A wall calendar showed several items circled for the coming week, including call mom on Saturday. When the first supervisor arrived, he walked the room slowly and wrote his own conclusion in a brief note. The apartment showed no forced entry, no obvious struggle, and no sign that the occupant had chosen to leave. For detectives, that combination pointed to one conclusion. Whatever happened to Isabel had almost certainly started away from this locked, tidy room. Detective Frank Delgado took over the case before noon on June 19, 1960. He walked through Isabel Romero's apartment himself, then ordered the door secured and the hallway canvassed. By midday, he had opened a formal missing person file with a notation rarely used in Fresno at that time: suspicious circumstances. Delgado's first priority was the last 24 hours of Isabel's life. He drove to Fresno City College and met with the department chair, the fundraiser organizer, and several instructors who worked with her on June 18th. Attendance sheets showed she taught a morning class that day from 9 to 9:50 a.m. A receptionist confirmed she stopped by the office shortly after 10 a.m. to drop off exam grades. At 4:15 p.m., a staff member saw her in the auditorium arranging programs on chairs for the evening event. Multiple witnesses placed Isabel at the scholarship fundraiser from 7 p.m. until shortly before 10:30 p.m. She took tickets at the door, spoke briefly at the podium, and collected donation envelopes. One instructor remembered her wearing a light dress and carrying a small notebook. Another recalled something else. As the auditorium emptied, he saw Isabel standing near the side exit with a man he did not recognize, speaking quietly beside the stage curtain. He could not hear the words. When shown photos later, he could not match the man to anyone in her circle. Phone records recovered from the college's switchboard listed one incoming call to Isabel's shared office at 5:42 p.m. on June 18th. The call lasted 3 minutes and originated from a pay phone near the Air Force installation. Delgado noted that time. He knew Mark Halpern sometimes used public phones off base to avoid tying up military lines. By the end of the first full day, 3 names were underlined in his notebook. Mark Halpern, the former boyfriend with a call on the record; Victor Hale, the downstairs neighbor with a prior harassment warning; and Caleb Morris, the former student and laborer with access to a secluded ranch outside town. None of them had been interviewed yet. None of them knew Delgado already had questions prepared for each one. On June 24, 1960, 5 days after Isabel Romero was reported missing, Fresno police organized a wider search beyond her apartment and campus. Patrol cars and volunteers were assigned to the roads Isabel most often drove between the college and her neighborhood. Detective Frank Delgado requested that every dirt turnoff and irrigation lane within a few miles be checked. By mid-morning, teams on the south side of town began walking the edges of orchards and service roads that paralleled rural highways. Shortly after 1 p.m., a reserve officer radioed in a possible sighting. A pale 4-door sedan sat on a narrow dirt road off a county route near the Kings River, roughly 7 miles from Isabel's apartment. The car was pulled in at an angle, with the rear facing the main road and the front pointed toward an open field. The driver's door was closed but unlocked. The right rear tire had sunk several inches into soft ground that had since dried and cracked. Delgado arrived and confirmed the license plate matched Isabel's vehicle. Inside, the cabin was unusually tidy. The ignition was off. There were no shattered windows, no visible blood, and no torn fabric. On the front passenger seat rested Isabel's canvas book bag, containing 2 paperbacks, a grade book, and a small notepad. In the glove compartment, officers found her registration and an envelope with emergency cash. Nothing had been taken. What drew Delgado's attention were the marks in the dirt around the car. Beneath and behind the rear wheels, he saw at least 2 overlapping tire patterns. One set matched the tread of Isabel's sedan. The other showed a broader, deeper pattern consistent with a pickup or farm truck. The soil packed into her wheel wells contained a lighter, sandier mix than the soil near her apartment complex. A farmer who worked nearby told deputies he had noticed the car sometime before sunrise earlier that week, but could not give an exact day. He assumed someone's car had broken down and been left. For Delgado, the location and condition of the vehicle supported a different conclusion. Someone had driven Isabel's car away from her life and tried to make it look like she had simply driven away herself. In the week after Isabel Romero's car was found, Detective Frank Delgado pushed to move beyond roadside searches. The overlapping tire tracks and the location near the Kings River pointed in one direction on his map. They pointed toward the Morris family almond ranch, where former student Caleb Morris lived and worked with his relatives on several dozen acres of trees and open lots. Delgado confirmed through records that the ranch lay less than 3 miles from the dirt road where Isabel's sedan had been abandoned. He also confirmed something else. Caleb owned a light pickup truck with tires similar in width to the second tread pattern documented under Isabel's car. With that, Delgado drafted an affidavit and asked a judge for a limited search warrant. On July 2, 1960, a small team drove out to the Morris property. The main house and barn showed nothing unusual at first glance. Tools were stacked. Feed bags were piled along one wall. Caleb appeared cooperative, saying he had heard about Isabel on the radio and was willing to help. When Delgado asked to see the back of the property, Caleb hesitated for a moment, then led the group past a line of trees to an open clearing. There, behind a low rise of dirt, they found a broad patch of ground stained dark and covered with gray ash. The circle stretched nearly 10 feet across. The ash lay thicker in the center, with bits of warped metal and wire embedded in it. One evidence technician, scraping the surface, turned up a few small white fragments. Under a hand lens, they appeared smooth and brittle, unlike wood or stone. Samples of ash, soil, and the white pieces were collected, sealed, and labeled for the Fresno County lab. Near the edge of the burned area, another technician recovered a single dark leatherwork glove, singed along the cuff, but mostly intact. No one on scene could say who it belonged to. The Morrises denied recognizing it. When the search team left that afternoon, they had no body, no obvious weapon, and nothing that proved a crime had taken place. They only had a burned circle in the dirt that looked very much like a place where something had been erased. The first formal interviews in Isabel Romero's case began the same afternoon the Morris Ranch was searched. Detectives brought in people who had seen her on June 18th and people whose names were now in every report. They started with her mother. Elena Romero described her daughter's habits in clear detail. Isabel always called on Saturdays between 7 o'clock and 7:30 p.m. She had never missed a call without warning. On June 18th, the phone stayed silent. Elena tried calling Isabel's apartment after 8 p.m. twice and got no answer. Phone records later confirmed both attempts. Next, detectives took statements from neighbors in Isabel's building. One tenant directly across the hall said she heard Isabel's door open sometime after midnight that night, followed by a brief sound like a voice and then the deadbolt turning. She did not hear footsteps on the stairs. A second neighbor reported something else. Around 12:30 a.m., he looked through his window facing the parking lot and saw 2 cars, Isabel's sedan and a dark pickup truck idling near the entrance. He could not see who was inside. The first suspect interview was with Mark Halpern at the Air Force installation. He confirmed making the 5:42 p.m. call to Isabel's office on June 18th. He said he simply asked how her day was and whether they might talk about their past relationship sometime later in the summer. Base records and 2 fellow officers placed him in the barracks lounge for most of the evening. Gate logs showed his car never left the base that night. Delgado noted his alibi as strong but not perfect. It still did not explain the pay phone near the base that placed the call. They then questioned Victor Hale at the Fresno police station. Hale said he was home alone the night Isabel vanished, watching television and reading. He admitted he spoke with her in the hallway every now and then, but denied any romantic interest. When asked if he had ever written her notes, he paused before saying no. A search of his apartment found no obvious evidence connected to Isabel. The last early interview was with Caleb Morris, who insisted he had not seen Isabel in months and had no idea why her car was found near his family's ranch. But that claim would not survive long once the lab reports came back. The lab reports from the Morris Ranch came back in late July 1960 and pushed the case into a gray area. The Fresno County chemist noted unusually high calcium content in the ash samples, inconsistent with ordinary brush or wood fires. The small white fragments collected from the burned circle showed internal structure similar to bone under magnification. But the report ended with one crucial sentence: quantity too small, origin undetermined, further testing not authorized. For Detective Frank Delgado, that meant no official confirmation of human remains. Without a body, he knew the district attorney would hesitate. He requested permission to return to the ranch with a larger team and conduct limited excavation around the burned site. His written request emphasized the proximity to Isabel Romero's abandoned car and Caleb Morris's access. The answer from his command staff was short: denied. Reason: insufficient evidence of a crime. Inside the department, some supervisors pushed a different theory. They argued Isabel might have left voluntarily, met someone of her own choice, and disappeared by agreement. They pointed to the absence of visible blood, the tidy apartment, and her stressful workload. They suggested she could have stepped into a car with someone she trusted. Delgado rejected that on paper. Isabel's bank account showed no withdrawals after June 18th. Her paycheck remained untouched. Her passport stayed in a desk drawer. Pressure also increased to look again at Mark Halpern. He was a clean suspect on paper. Military. Former boyfriend. Recent phone call. Command believed the public would understand that line of suspicion. Delgado returned to the base, rechecked the gate logs, and interviewed additional personnel. Every check came back the same. Halpern's car never left the installation. His presence was confirmed in the barracks lounge during the critical hours. With Halpern mostly cleared and the ranch search blocked, the file drifted. Media interest faded by the end of summer. In March 1961, the case status was quietly changed from missing with foul play suspected to possible kidnapping, inactive pending new information. The samples from the Morris property went into storage under a simple label: ash, fabric, glove. On his last memo before reassignment, Delgado wrote one line that no one followed up on for decades. For more than 40 years, the file with Isabel Romero's name on it sat in basement storage at Fresno Police Headquarters. It held typed reports, a handful of black and white scene photos, and 3 sealed evidence envelopes from the Morris Ranch. When the department moved buildings in the late 1980s, the box was relabeled 1960 to 1962 missing, inactive, and pushed onto a different metal shelf. By then, Detective Frank Delgado had retired and left Fresno. Isabel's mother had passed away. The case no longer appeared on any active list. In 2004, under pressure from the state to review long unsolved violent cases, Fresno police created a small cold case unit. One detective, Laura Medina, was assigned files from 1955 to 1965. In her first months, she read dozens of reports that ended with the same phrase: suspended pending further information. In the middle of one stack, she opened a thin folder stamped Romero, Isabel, 1960, and paused at Delgado's last handwritten line: if technology improves, return to Morris property. Medina checked the evidence appendix and saw 3 items that had never been fully tested: ash and soil from a burn area, charred fabric, 1 dark leather glove with slight heat damage. She went to the evidence warehouse and asked a technician to locate the box. The sealed envelopes were still there, labels yellowed but intact, each bearing Delgado's signature. By 2005, DNA analysis could sometimes recover profiles from items that old. Medina filed a request to unseal the glove and ash samples for modern testing. The state crime lab in Sacramento agreed to attempt short tandem repeat analysis on any biological material inside the glove and any bone-like material in the ash. The evidence was transported under chain of custody forms stricter than anything available in 1960. Months later, The reports came back. The ash contained traces of burned bone consistent with an adult, but was too degraded for a full profile. The lining of the glove, however, held tiny preserved skin cell fragments. Technicians pulled 2 partial DNA profiles from those cells. One matched a reference sample taken years earlier from hair in Isabel's old hairbrush. The other matched a man still alive in California, a man whose name had appeared only once in the original file, in a short witness list that no one had ever followed up on. The second DNA profile from the glove matched a man named Eric Dalton, born in 1934 and living in Modesto, California. When Detective Laura Medina pulled the original 1960 case file, she saw his name only once, buried in a supplemental report. Dalton and Caleb Morris had been arrested together for disorderly conduct near Fresno City College in late 1959 after causing a disturbance near the campus entrance. The incident ended with a small fine and no further action. No one in 1960 had treated Dalton as anything more than background noise. In 2006, Medina drove to Modesto and requested a voluntary interview at the local police station. Dalton, now in his 70s, arrived on time. He denied ever meeting Isabel Romero. He admitted knowing the Morris family from years back, but said he had not seen Caleb since sometime in the 60s. When Medina confronted him with the old arrest report and the DNA match from the glove, he claimed not to understand how his genetic material could be there. He said he had never owned a glove like that. After the interview, Medina dug deeper into his history. Employment records showed Dalton and Caleb had worked together at a Fresno packing plant in 1959 and 1960. A former co-worker remembered they often spent weekends at the Morris Ranch. One name on an old human resources contact sheet stood out, a secretary named Linda Cortez, now in her 60s and living in Bakersfield. When Medina interviewed Cortez, the story shifted. Cortez said she had dated Dalton briefly in the late 1970s. During one argument, he told her there were things buried on a ranch outside Fresno, and that no one would ever find that teacher. She had not understood the reference at the time. Years later, she saw a short article about the cold case review and recognized the name Romero. Fear kept her silent until Medina knocked on her door. With Dalton's DNA in the glove, his documented connection to Caleb, and Cortez's statement, Medina requested a new search warrant for the old Morris property and a formal reopening of the case as a potential homicide. This time, the judge signed both. On March 3, 2008, Fresno County issued an arrest warrant for Eric Dalton on charges of second-degree murder and destruction of evidence. 2 days later, Modesto officers took him into custody at his small duplex without incident. When they read the warrant, he said only one sentence. "This is about that teacher, isn't it?" He was transported to Fresno County Jail and held without bail pending arraignment. At the first court appearance, prosecutors outlined the core of the case. Dalton's DNA inside the glove recovered from the Morris Ranch, the same glove that also held Isabel Romero's DNA. The ash and bone fragments from the burned circle, now confirmed as adult human, remains consistent with Isabel's age. The documented connection between Dalton and Caleb Morris, in Dalton's own words, to Linda Cortez. The judge agreed there was probable cause to move forward. Caleb could not stand trial. He had died in a farm equipment accident in 1985, recorded as an industrial fatality. That left Dalton as the only living person linked by both evidence and statements to the burn site. His defense attorney argued early that there was no body, no direct eyewitness, and that Dalton's DNA on a glove proved only presence, not intent. The trial began in late 2009 in Fresno County Superior Court. 12 jurors heard the full story of a disappearance almost 50 years old. Forensic experts from the state lab explained how they had extracted profiles from decades-old material. They testified that the chance of the glove DNA matching someone other than Dalton was less than 1 in several billion. Another expert described the excavation of the old burn site and the recovery of bone fragments, metal, and soil. Then the jury heard Cortez. She repeated under oath that Dalton told her about a teacher and a ranch outside Fresno where no one would ever find anything. When the defense pressed her on dates and memory, she stayed close to her original statement and did not back down. Finally, the prosecution played Dalton's recorded interview where he denied knowing Isabel, but could not explain the DNA or his past comments. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom to deliver a decision that would finally give Isabel Romero's file a label it had never had before. On November 19, 2009, the jury in Fresno County Superior Court returned to the courtroom. When the clerk read the verdict, they found Eric Dalton guilty of second-degree murder and guilty of destroying evidence in connection with the death of Isabel Romero. Dalton looked straight ahead and showed little visible reaction. The judge thanked the jurors and set a date for sentencing 3 weeks later to allow both sides to prepare their final arguments. At sentencing, prosecutors asked for the longest term allowed under California law for the time of the crime. They argued that Dalton had helped remove Isabel from her home, moved her car to mislead investigators, and participated in burning her remains on the Morris Ranch. They stressed that his silence had lasted almost 50 years and had blocked any chance of a proper burial. Dalton's attorney asked the court to consider his age, health, and the absence of prior serious convictions. The judge reviewed the original 1960 file, the cold case reports, and the trial record. He noted that the case would never have reached court without preservation of the glove, the ash samples, and Delgado's memo. Then he imposed a life sentence with a minimum term, making Dalton effectively certain to spend the rest of his life in state prison. As deputies led him away, he did not look toward the gallery. Outside the courthouse, the district attorney's office held a short press conference. They called the case an example of how DNA and patient file review could restore accountability in older crimes. Former students of Isabel who were still living told reporters they were relieved the case finally had a clear conclusion, even without a traditional grave. Some legal commentators questioned the strength of relying on partial remains and statements from decades earlier, while others pointed to the layered evidence as a model for future prosecutions. Within the Fresno Police Department, the cold case unit used the Romero investigation as a training example. New detectives studied how a single line in a closing memo and a sealed envelope led to a conviction nearly half a century later. In the records room, Isabel's file was moved from the inactive shelf to a cabinet marked cold case, resolved. On that same shelf, other boxes still wait for someone to open them and ask the same hard questions.